Hello again, my little conscripts, and welcome to another Mordian Glory video. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about prices. Has Warhammer 40k just got too expensive? There's been a lot of chit and, dare I say, chat around the proverbial internet water cooler about the recent price increases for Warhammer 40k, and a lot of people have been saying that we finally reached that point. The point that people have been worried about for years. 40k has crossed the line, and it's just got too expensive to justify. But let's take a look at this, and let's be objective about it, and let's see if there is some truth to these worries, or if maybe it's just a bunch of overblown fear-mongering.
Attention, Guardsmen! The Commissariat has detected you have not yet liked this video. Do so immediately, or else you will face the Emperor's wrath. And anyone who has not yet subscribed to the channel will be transferred to the penal battalions. That is all. Move out!
So first up, a little bit of context. Why has this conversation of prices cropped up again, and why are a lot of people talking about it online? Well, Games Workshop recently announced another price increase, and they do this fairly regularly. Once to twice a year, they put the prices up on things, and this time they put prices up by about 4%. To be clear, this is an average of 4%. There are some things which have gone up significantly more, and there are some things which haven't gone up at all. But so it balances out to about 4%, but it's not just a 4% applied to everything, it's unevenly applied across different products. For example, pretty much every single combat patrol is going up from £100 to £105, which is a 5% increase. But then you've got things like the paints, which aren't going up at all, so it's a 0% increase. And then you've got some stuff which is going up more than 5%. You've got things which are like 6% and stuff like that, even a bit higher than that. So overall, it averages out to 4%, but you'll notice that some products do become actually way more expensive than they were. They have a pretty big jump up. Now, Games Workshop putting prices up is nothing new. They do it fairly regularly, and a lot of people have become quite jaded and just quite used to the fact that the price is always going up. But I think with a lot of the chatter that I've been seeing around the internet, it feels like we're reaching a bit of a boiling the frog moment, where the frog actually realizes it's being boiled, because a lot of people are going, wait, hang on a second, we're getting another price increase, and they've gone back and gone through the numbers, and they've realized that when you actually look at where the prices were just 2 or 3 years ago, things haven't just been going up by 4 or 5%. When you take into account the cumulative effect of these price increases, things have actually gone up by about 20% in about 3 years, which is a really, really big price increase. And one thing that I have noticed an increasing amount of people saying is that they just can't justify buying models from Games Workshop. In fact, when this news first broke, the most common comment that I saw was 3D printer go brrr. And these weren't just a few isolated comments here and there. No matter where you went online, whether it was over to Reddit and other forums like that, or the comment sections of YouTube videos covering this kind of stuff, the sentiment was very clear that these price increases are starting to get a bit out of control. And whilst there was an air of just jaded acceptance, a huge amount of the comments, a huge amount of the energy that was being projected out there was people were just saying that this has just got too expensive for them. And one video that I saw that really hammered it home to me and completely blew my mind was by a channel called Hellstorm Mikey. I'm going to make sure there's a link to his video down in the description below. I highly recommend that you go and check it out. But he actually did a really interesting mental exercise. He got access to the full list of what was going to go up in price and by how much. And it was huge. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of products. And this actually prompted him to go, hang on a second. How much would it cost for me to build my current army that I've been having a bit of fun with and taken to a few tournaments? And new in box from Games Workshop, this fun Space Marine army, which he'd just been using to have a bit of, a bit of a mess around with at a few events, and we're getting into the twilight of the edition, so you just start bringing like wacky things to tournaments, having a bit of fun. It was like over 600, over £700. And I was like, hang on, that's for a Space Marine army. if Space Marines are getting to like 600, 700 pounds just to buy a fun army, one 2,000 point list, then how expensive is it going to be for other factions as well? And so what I did, and what I would encourage all of you guys to do as well, and let me know down in the comment section what number you get, is go onto the Games Workshop website and work out, new in box, how much your army would be if you bought it today. And when I did this, the results were eye-watering. So I have been putting together a couple of 2,000 point guard armies, and I've been saying these are good beginner armies for people to get their hands on. If you're a guard player, so you can go from sort of 500 to 1,000 to 1,500 to 2,000 points. And so just looking at two army lists that I recommended, one for hybrid guard and one for mech guard, this is the cost that I got. £735.25. Now, I think it is important to note that this is before we have had the 4 to 5% price increase on these models. So you'd actually need to add about 4% to this, which comes to over £750. Think about £760. And this is for a single 2,000 point Imperial Guard army. In fact, if you want to see the list first, here it is. We've got my 2,000 points beginner guard here, a couple of Cadian Castellans, Cadian Command Squad, a couple of Leman Russ Commanders, Tech Priest, 60 Cadian Infantry, couple of heavy weapon squads, a couple of Kazakin squads, two more Leman Russes, Rogel Dawn, and a Scout Sentinel. And if we come over to Games Workshop, you can see we've got our 6 squads of Cadian Shock Troopers. We've got our Codex. You're going to need the Codex, even if you could take that out if you wanted to, but most people do want to have their Codex for their army, so I'm being fair and I'm including it. But if you want to take 37 quid off that, you can do so. And then you've got a couple of Cadian Castellans in here, a Cadian Command Squad, Tech Priest Engines here. We've got 4 Leman Russes, and we've got a Rogel Dawn battle tank, and we've got our Scout Sentinel, and a couple of squads of Kazakin, and a couple of heavy weapon squads. That is £735 before the price increase. It's going up to nearer to £800 for a single 2,000 point guard army list. That's without even then taking into account extra units that you might want to have. But what if you try something more like Mech Guard? How much would it cost me to build my Mech Guard army that I took to a few tournaments recently? Well, we've got a Cadian Castellan, a Commissar, 2 Leman Russes, 5 squads of Catachan Jungle Fighters, 2 artillery teams, and we've got 3 more Leman Russes, a Scout Sentinel, and 5 Chimeras. Well, before we've had the new price increases, this army is still coming to over £700, and it's going to be obviously another 4 or 5% higher than that as well. And this is actually not even true, because the artillery teams weren't in stock, so I had to use field ordnance batteries, which are a few pounds to about £6 cheaper each. So that's another £12 you add on, and that's assuming you want to use the old ass Catachan Jungle Fighter models, which a lot of people might not want to because they're old and they're ass. You might want to do this with Cadian Shock Troops. If you did want to do it with Cadian Shock Troops, you would have to add on time of recording right now, another £7.50 per squad. So that's going to come to £37.50 plus another £12 on top of this. So we're looking at about 50 quid there. So actually, it's no cheaper going for a guard mech army. Both armies are well over 700 quid, and that's before we even take into account this incoming 4% price increase, which is going to take both armies near as damn it to about 800 quid. And again, we've not taken into account paint or glue or anything like that, but those are hidden costs. If you're someone getting into 40k for the first time, you are going to need to buy a hobby knife. You are going to probably need a couple of pots of glue for this. You're going to need primer. You are going to need paint. I mean, those things can easily add on an extra £100. Easily. Probably more. So I think it might sound crazy, but between the price increase and the hidden costs of actually to build and paint these armies, you are looking at probably £900 to £1,000 for a Warhammer army now, which is very, very expensive. Okay, just out of curiosity, because I felt like it was a lot to say £1,000, I actually went and added what I thought was a reasonable amount of paint and sort of brushes and stuff into the situation. So that was, I got 2 tins of rattle paint from GW. I put 10 contrast paints in there because I looked at the Catachans that I'd painted recently, and I'd used 10 different paints. I'd used 9 different contrast paints, including and then on top of that I had a texture paint as well, and then I added in what I thought would be some reasonable brushes, a dry brush, a small layer brush, and a medium layer brush, something like that. And in total that did bring us to it did add an extra £100 on. So when we're looking at these armies, obviously the paints aren't going up in cost, but when we're looking at these armies, it is reasonable to say that if you were to buy your paints and stuff, that it can add on about £100. Now you might say that you don't get your paints and stuff from Games Workshop. That's fair enough, and your brushes not from Games Workshop. That's fair enough. That very well may be the case. But I added in what I would consider to be sort of the minimum amount that someone would need, and we've not taken into account things like a hobby knife and stuff like that. So I think if you balance it out between, okay, if you have even if you go to other places, like other companies, and buy like texture paint and brushes and stuff that might be cheaper and whatnot, I think you're still going to end up with probably spending about £100 on building and painting, and we haven't even put glue in here and stuff like that. So I think £100 is a reasonable estimate for hobbying supplies for you to be able to build a 2,000 point army. So you take the models, add sort of the 4% on to represent the price increase, and then you also add on £100 for hobbying supplies, and that is roughly how much it's going to cost for you to get a 2,000 point army. And I think you are probably looking at that. You might say, oh, well, brushes last, long. You probably will go through one each of these brushes for an army, and you probably will go through a couple of rattle cans. That's not going to be reusable. You're probably going to go through most of that paint. So, yeah, there might be some element of reusability on the hobbying side, but they are considered consumable. So I think it's reasonable to say that you can add on approximately, £100 worth of hobbying supplies to actually build and sort of paint an army. Although you might be able to argue that there is some reusability there. And like I said, I found that to be a really fun mental exercise, and I'd be really curious to see what numbers you guys come up with. Put it down in the comment section below. Now, I want to be clear about something here. Even if you've 3D printed your army and it's only cost you like 30 quid for a bottle of resin or something like that, go to your last 2,000 point army list and work out how much it would have been if you bought it new in box from Games Workshop today. And then put that number down below. Because obviously, I know there's going to be loads of comments where people are like, oh, well, actually, it didn't cost me very much at all because I thought you printed it. Yeah, 100%. And if you want to do that comparison as well and be like, hey, look, it cost me this much to 3D print it, but if I'd bought it from GW, it would have cost me this much, then yeah, that is also interesting and absolutely a valid sort of approach and opinion. Something I'd love to learn about and love to know about, just to see that comparison. But what I'm saying is, no matter where you got your models from, no matter whether they were secondhand or whatever it might be, do the exercise and work out how much it would cost if you bought your entire army new in box from Games Workshop, and put it down in the comment section, and I'll be curious to see what you guys come up with. Quick side note here. I know that you don't have to buy everything new in box from Games Workshop. You can buy things with third-party retailers that might have 15-20% off, and you can always buy things secondhand. Of course you can, and those are totally valid and they should be highlighted. And I think for a lot of people, they are going to be not only highlighted but necessary, absolutely necessary to engage with this hobby. But I think even if you take those things into account, we've only looked at this from the perspective of buying a single 2,000 point list. And as we all know, Warhammer 40k changes a lot these days, and so rarely are you going to just have a 2,000 point list and then it never changes. It sort of stays hermetically sealed. Even if we are quite conservative. Most people are going to need about 2,500 points, probably 3,000 points of an army to have a reasonable cushion and degree of flexibility before it can truly be considered completed. So with that taken into account, I think even if you say you can save 20% off going to a third-party retailer, or you can save maybe even more than that getting it second-hand, if we then don't look at the bare minimum, and we look at the more realistic scenario of needing probably an extra 500 to 1,000 points before you can say that army is in a place where it's cushioned from any meta changes and whatnot, I think you're probably still looking at similar costs. But going back to the main topic of the video, Warhammer 40k, price increases, it's expensive. Now, that's not a particularly bold or hot statement to say. You know, it's like saying water is wet. So I want to go a step further here. I want to talk about why Warhammer 40k feels exceedingly expensive. And again, we're not talking about this in salty terms. We're not going to be a salty boy or anything like that. Hopefully you guys can see throughout this video, I've been pretty positive, pretty upbeat. I've stuck to what I said. We're going to look at this objectively. These are just going to be numbers and stuff. So what I want to do is, again, be objective, but look at why 40k is so expensive. So there are many different ways you can approach this question of why is 40k so expensive. You could look at it and just say, well, Games Workshop's just being greedy. If they keep putting the prices up and people keep buying it, then what have they got to lose? I don't want to look at it from that angle, just because I said I wasn't going to be salty, and that way lies salt. So instead, I want to look at this from a different angle, and one which I haven't seen a lot of other people talking about. One of the reasons that I think Warhammer 40k feels so expensive these days is because there is a lack of good deals available direct from Games Workshop. You see, Warhammer 40k has always been pretty expensive, and in fact, I guarantee you there will be some people down the comment section right now who are saying, well, the price increase is just in line with inflation. And so actually, if you go back and you look at the prices then and the prices now, that they're relatively where they should be. But one of the things that I don't think those kind of comments take into account is the fact that in the past, Games Workshop used to offer quite good bundles and quite good army deals, and now that is something they just don't do. Let's go back to 8th edition, which isn't that long ago. The end of 8th edition was only about 6 years ago. They used to sell a box called a Start Collecting. And Start Collecting is exactly what it said on the tin. It was a great way of collecting Warhammer 40k, and these were a really big hit, and they were very successful with Warhammer 40k players. For example, the Imperial Guard one that came out was £50, and it came with a Lehman Russ tank, 10 guardsmen, a heavy weapon team, and a commissar. All of that for 50 quid, and they were such a good deal that most people hoovered them up. They sold like hotcakes. In fact, a lot of people built their entire Militarum Tempestus Scions armies off the Scion Start Collecting, which came with a Taurox, a Commissar, and 10 Scions, all for, you guessed it, £50. And there are numerous examples of these. You had ones like for the AdMech as well, where you got an Honor Guard Dune Crawler, and you got 10 Scutari, and you got a Tech Priest Dominus for £50. If you bought all of these Start Collecting box content separately, then they would be much, much more expensive. But because these boxes were such a good deal, Warhammer 40k didn't feel expensive. It actually felt completely accessible. I just want to preempt some comments where some people say, but Mordian, the new Combat Patrols are not the Start Collecting sets. They're designed for you to play the Combat Patrol game. They're not designed for you to start collecting. You're absolutely right, but in a funny sort of way, that kind of supports my argument. Because if we say, okay, Combat Patrols are not designed to start collecting, So let's not even include those in any possible equations that we might do. Like, okay, let's start a Death Guard army by getting the Death Guard combat patrol, which is actually quite good because you get that Rhino, you get the Marines, you get the character. Okay, if we can't even take those into account, then for some factions, Warhammer 40k just got even more expensive. So I was being generous, including combat patrols as a comparison to start collecting and saying that they're a good way to get into this game. But if you're saying that we can't even count those, then that's actually a factor in my argument and what I'm saying here, which is 40k is more expensive because there are less and less and less bundle deals that are good for you to get into the game and to buy your army in a more efficient and wallet-friendly manner. Now, speaking of combat patrols for a moment, one of the big differences between combat patrols and the old start collecting sets, but also how the contents of combat patrols have evolved over the years, is the contents are now way less beginner orientated, and they're often just sort of full of filler. Like that old start collecting set was all killer, no filler. It was great. And then you had the combat patrol when that came in, and the old guard combat patrol was really good. You got a platoon of Cadians, and you got a field ordnance battery, and you got a sentinel, and that was good. And that was mostly killer, although you could argue that the fobs were a bit of a filler, and there was no heavy armor in there, but you know what, it was fine. Totally good. I had no issues with the old combat patrol. And then you come over to the new one, and yes, the guard one is probably the most egregious example, but there are many others you can point to. The new combat patrols for most factions are considered to be worse than the old ones. That is a widely held belief, not 100% by all factions, but a widely held belief by many factions that their old combat patrols were better than the new ones. Their old ones were more killer, the new ones are more filler. And I just want to reiterate this point. I am trying to be as fair and balanced and objective as possible when it comes to talking about these things. I'm not going all the way back into the past and trying to compare something like the 3rd edition, 4th edition Imperial Guard battle forces to the new combat patrols. I think 8th edition, with it being... those combat patrols were still sold in 9th edition as well. It is important to say. So we're only going back sort of 5 years. We're not going back, 30 years or 20 years. But, it is worth mentioning that back in the day, a Cadian battle force, which cost £50, did come with 20 Cadians, a Leman Russ, and you've also got a heavy weapons team. And the Catachan one came with 25 Catachans, and you got a heavy weapon team, and you got 2 Sentinels. And both sets, I do believe, also came with some terrain as well. So you can see the Cajun one got these little ruins. These are very famous if you're an old school player, and you still see them kicking around at a lot of hobby clubs these days. And Catachan one came with 3 trees. But the point is, I'm not going too far back. I'm actually trying to keep things relatively modern and look at this through the lens of, look, this is where we were just a few years ago. How come things seem to be so much more expensive now? Because I think it's important to mention that when doing these kind of videos, there is that risk of sounding like you're just reminiscing about the good old days. You're just feasting on the member berries, and nostalgia is a hell of a drug and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not looking back to when I was a kid. I'm looking back to just, like I said, 4 or 5 years ago, when start collectings were a thing, but then combat patrols started coming in, replacing them. In fact, I've been saying that combat patrols replaced start collectings about 4 or 5 years ago, but that's not true. I've just Googled it now, and actually the last time that the start collecting Imperial Guard / Astra Militarum box was sold was actually in January 2023. So only about 2.5 years ago, because the reason why this thought sort of triggered in my head was because I was like, well, hang on, when did we get the 9th edition Guard Codex? Because that replaced the old Combat Patrol. Oh yeah, we got it towards the end of 9th edition, which was about 2.5 years ago now. So yeah, these things we're not even talking a long time ago. We are talking a couple of years ago, 3 years ago. You could get those old Leman Russ and infantry box sets for 50 quid. I think they were about 60 quid by the time they finished selling. Still great. And then we moved over to the new combat patrols, and those have very quickly become all filler and no killer. Oh, and one last thing I want to mention. It's not just about the combat patrols and the fact that there's a lack of bundle deals available from Games Workshop. There's two other factors that I think need to be mentioned here. We lost the old snap fit easy to build range. So if you're someone that only joined in 10th edition, you won't be aware of this, but you used to be able to buy 5 Cadian shock troops for £6. In fact, they were £5, but then they went up to £6. Now, they only came with lasguns, and they came in 2 pieces. And the models weren't bad quality, but they weren't great quality. They were just normal quality, I would say. And a lot of people were totally okay with the quality of the miniatures, because what you use them for is to just fill out your Cadian squads. So if you got one of the old Cadian shock trooper sets, you would build all of the actual multi-part Cadians with all the special weapons that you could, because they weren't like what we've got now, where this arm can only be used for this bit. Everything was interchangeable. So you bought one box of Cadians multi-part and built like 10 special weapons, sergeants, voxcasters, all that kind of stuff. And then you would just go and buy a whole bunch of these snap fit guardsmen and fill the squads out. And it would cost you way, way, way less than if you just bought the 10-man boxes. Now, the problem that we've obviously got now in 2025 at time of recording this is the fact that there are no snap fit guardsmen, and you only have the multi-part kits, and the multi-part kits are less interchangeable. You have to build them with the melter gun, or choose between the melter gun and another weapon and all that kind of stuff. So the kits are more restrictive, and you've got no way of really filling those kits out from Games Workshop themselves. And I think that is actually worth just highlighting for a moment. One of the ways that 40k used to offset the cost is you could really make the bits go a lot further. You could save up all of your bits, and it was quite easy to then use those bits on other models to make sure that you squeezed every last penny out of the kits that you bought. Now, there is, of course, still the bits box, and there is still an element of you doing that, of course. But I would say, and I think it's fair to say, it's not exaggeration, I think it's fair to say that it is harder now than it was in the past, due to the way that the new GW models are designed, with the fact that specific arms have to go with specific weapons, and they have to go on specific bodies. And one last bit I want to talk about in this section of the video is GW doesn't do sales. They never do a sale. There's never a Christmas sale, 30% off, summer sale, 20% off. There's never ever a sale. And many other companies and many other product lines absolutely embrace the vibe of sales. In fact, the only time we've ever seen a sale from a Games Workshop related product was when we had that fire sale around all of the Saturnine boxes that happened. But other than that, Games Workshop is a company that doesn't embrace the concept of sales. And that leads to, like, psychologically, this idea of you're not getting a good deal, because people love a good sale and it makes them feel good about what they're buying. If you don't have a sale, then people just feel like what they're buying is expensive. Okay, so up until this point in the video, everything we've talked about has kind of been through the lens of Games Workshop, buying stuff directly from Games Workshop now and comparing it to what you could buy directly from them in the past. But that's a really one-dimensional way of looking at this, because this is not the past, this is the now. And in the now, you don't have to buy your models from Games Workshop. And there are other companies out there which will sell you models which are totally compatible with Warhammer 40k at a fraction of the cost. And a great example of this is Wargames Atlantic, who will sell you multi-part plastic guardsmen of a good quality for a lot less than Games Workshop. You can buy 10 Kriegers from GW for over £30, £33 I think. You can buy 24 Le Grognards, which absolutely can be used to represent the Kriegers. They have World War I helmets, they have gas masks, they have trench coats, they have big rifles. You can get 24 of them for £25. And if you actually bulk buy, which you're going to want to do as a guard player, right? You don't want one box of Kriegers. If you're a Krieg player, you want like 10 boxes. You want to have a big infantry wave, right? You know, over the top, all that kind of stuff. Well, they have a bulk buy discount. So literally, if you buy like 3 boxes, you get 7.5% off. If you buy 5 boxes, you get 15% off. So you can go to Games Workshop and buy your Kriegers in your boxes of 10. It's going to cost you hundreds of pounds, as we saw. Or you could buy 100, is that 120? 120 boxes of 120 infantry, not 120 boxes. 120 of these pseudo Krieg infantry, and it's going to come in at about 100 quid, 105 pounds, 106 pounds. And these are good quality. Everyone I know who has bought Le Grognards has raved about them and said that they are easy to build, perfectly detailed, and absolutely happy with them. But the point of this bit is not just to shill Wargames Atlantic, although I'm very happy to do so. They're a company that I absolutely support. But the point of this was to talk about the psychology. If there's only one game in town and they charge whatever they charge, then you're just going to think, well, that's just what it's worth, because you have no frame of reference. But when us as consumers start becoming aware of other products out there which are perfectly good, absolutely no issues whatsoever, perfectly good, and they're so much cheaper than Games Workshop's, not only does that make those other products, let's say the Wargames Atlantic stuff, for example, not only does it make that other stuff feel like a good deal and feel cheaper, but the knock-on effect, the boomerang effect of this is it makes the original Warhammer 40k models from Games Workshop feel more expensive. It's a double doozy. These things aren't isolated, they're linked. If one product feels like a good deal, it makes another product feel like a rip-off. And again, this is why we're seeing so much more chatter about, you know, Games Workshop and their models being so expensive, and people feeling like they've been priced out, because people have more choice now. They have more options. And so when Games Workshop decides to put their prices up and never do a sale and make the bundles less efficient and less good and less wallet friendly, people just go, and then people can see other companies not doing that. Well, it makes Games Workshop feel even more expensive, and it makes these other companies feel like an even better deal. And it's all these little myriad factors which go into explaining why this feeling of just being completely priced out from GW is more so than before. But wait, there's more. I know what you're thinking. Mordian Glory, please stop. I've heard enough. I did consider spreading this video out over a couple of videos, but A, I didn't want to be seen as like milking it, and B, I kind of just wanted to have everything in one place. So if you're still with us at this point, you're a beautiful bastard, and thank you so much. There are a couple of other last final bits that I want to mention. The first one's a quick one. Games Workshop, their response to changing financial situations is often to increase the price. But that's the only lever we ever seem to see them pull. But everybody knows there are other things that businesses can do to try and respond to things like inflation and to things like tariffs. You don't have to just put the prices up. You can try and encourage sales in other ways. You know, having a sale, having something like 20% off, or having, if Games Workshop just came out and went on all these old like limited stock models, whatever it may be, 50% off, something crazy, some mad summer sale that they did, people would absolutely love it, and it would generate a lot of goodwill, and it would be a great way of them being able to generate more revenue because they're just shifting loads and loads of models. But they never do that. The only lever they ever pull is price increase, price increase, price increase. And again, back in the day when they were the only game in town, people just accepted that because they had no sort of frame of reference within this industry. They might have a frame of reference from other industries, but they had no frame of reference within this industry. But that's no longer the case. You've got other companies that absolutely will pull other levers to try and encourage sales and encourage customer loyalty. And Games Workshop never choosing to pull the other levers and only ever choosing to pull that lever, it feeds into this psychology. And consumer goodwill is very, very important. A lot of the time, consumers will look past buggy or messy products if they can see sort of the heart and the soul is behind it, and things are going in the right direction. They'll be very, very patient. But if you have low consumer goodwill, and all you're doing is pulling this price increase lever, and all you're doing is making things more expensive, then people are going to not give you as much leeway. And I think that's a really important thing to mention, not just in the context of GW only pulling one lever, aka price increases, but also I think there is a lot less goodwill to GW now than there has been in the past. This stems from things like constantly models getting legends, they're making old models invalidated, so you have to buy the new models. All of this feeds into this psychology that I was talking about. But my final point, and this is a really important one, it's not even about the prices themselves, it's the kind of products that Games Workshop chooses to offer. Let's look at heavy weapon squads. In 2025, in New Games Workshop, you can only buy these in boxes of 3. And they come in at £31.50 at time of recording, but I think that is going up to about £33. But they come in at about 30 quid. And you have to buy 3 of them. But what if you only want one? What if you just want one heavy weapon team? Well, in the past, Games Workshop sold oneers. They'd sell a single Crisis battlesuit. They'd sell a single heavy weapon team. They would sell a single plasma gunner. You could buy a single plasma gunner for about £6. Now, individually, buying one heavy weapon team rather than buying 3, it would actually mean that heavy weapon team was more expensive just for the oneer. But if you only needed one, it was cheaper. It's like if we look back at Eldar Wraithguard. So Eldar Wraithguard, they used to be sold in blister packs of 1, and they were actually more expensive on a per model basis back in the day than they are now for buying a box of 5 of them. But if you only needed 1, then you could just buy 1. You didn't need to buy things in these big bulky boxes of 3 or 5 or 10. You could just buy 1. So from a seasoned hobbying perspective, just being able to buy 1 here and 1 there was really useful, because it meant that you didn't end up with spares lying around that you couldn't do anything with. So for example, let's say you bought a heavy weapon squad and you built 1 with an autocannon and 2 with las cannons because you thought that'd be like a more flexible loadout. But then you started playing and you realized actually you just wanted to have a squad of 3 las cannons. You didn't need to go and buy another heavy weapon squad. You could just go and buy 1 heavy weapon team, burn up the las cannon, and then you were good to go. And maybe you could do something with that spare autocannon because you had infantry squads which could take heavy weapon teams in them. So you're like, okay, well now I've still got a home for that one. So I've not wasted anything, and I've got the loadouts that I wanted. And even though, per model basis, technically it's cost me more, the actual cost, it's cost me less and it's been more useful. But there's a whole nother angle, another perspective that we haven't even really talked about, which is kind of like the pocket money angle, the pocket money perspective. Now, it's been a long time since I've received pocket money, or an allowance if you're an American, but it's been a long time. But one of my core memories of being a kid is my mum taking me with her into town when she had to do some jobs at the weekend, because obviously during the week I was in school, but at the weekend my dad would be working and my mum just couldn't leave me at home unsupervised because I was only young. So she'd take me with her, and if I was well behaved, as she was doing some shopping or getting some bits and bobs, whatever it may be, one of the things that would happen is, if I was well behaved, she'd take me at the end of the day to the local Games Workshop or hobby store, and I would be allowed to pick something out. And one of the things that I was allowed to pick out, it would always be a little something, Maybe it was a single like goblin shaman, or maybe it would be like a Imperial Guard like plasma gunner, Or maybe it would be a Space Marine bike. Or you used to be able to get these little combat squads of tactical Marines that was £6 for 5 of them, and they only came with bolters. They didn't get all the special weapons in the main tactical box. But the point is that, I was allowed to get something that was, about a £5 or less than a £5. Now, of course, those prices have changed and all that kind of stuff. But even so, the fact that there was something that I could get or I could spend my pocket money on as well. My mum would get it for me, I'd spend my pocket money on. The fact that there was something small and accessible like that was really, really important. And I don't think I would be playing Warhammer 40k now today if I didn't have those kind of core memories, and I didn't have that ability to just be able to buy a little something here and there. Now, if we fast forward to Games Workshop in 2025, there's no products available like that. There's nothing available that's within the pocket money range. Now, maybe I'm massively out of touch, and I'm sure there'll be lots of parents, down in the comment section saying, Mordian, getting £1 a week for your pocket money just isn't feasible anymore. Now everyone gets like, £20 a week. And maybe that is the case, but I still think having models at that pocket money / allowance level, or just having little wanners that you can add to your force, is a very viable product line. And I think it is a business decision of Games Workshop to no longer offer those kinds of products. Now, I don't know why that is. I don't know what the business decision may be, but I think it absolutely is a business decision. Games Workshop doesn't want to sell you wanners. They want to sell you multiples. Now, even if on a per model basis, those multiples are actually cheaper, because there's a minimum buy-in now. Look, if you want to buy a heavy weapon squad, you have to spend £31.50, not a £5 or a £10. Because there's such a high minimum buy-in for things like that, it contributes to this feeling, to this perspective of 40k is getting too expensive. And all of these little factors have come together over the years. And so this is where I think there's a bit of a difference between the past and the present. In the past, prices would go up, but there would be good bundle deals. In the past, prices would go up, but there would be wanners that you could buy. In the past, you had price increases, but you had ways of offsetting that by making the kits go a lot further, because there were a lot of interchangeable and compatible parts. Now we have price increases, but there's no wanners. Now we have price increases, but there's no good deals to offset it. And now we have price increases, but the models are a lot harder to make the bits go further. And so this is where I think there's a difference between the past and the present. There's always been price increases, but directly from Games Workshop themselves, there's always been ways of offsetting those price increases. And now, one by one, those Jenga bricks have been taken out. One by one, those ladders have been pulled up. And now we get to this place where not only is Warhammer expensive, but from Games Workshop themselves, there is almost no way of realistically offsetting those costs. So that just about covers everything that I wanted to talk about with Games Workshop. But it wouldn't be a Mordian Glory video if I didn't at least do a little bit of shilling and a little bit of ball washing for my new favourite model company, which is Warlord Games. Now, I know I can hear a lot of people collectively groan, "Oh, Mordian, stop shilling Warlord." Look, I've left this to the very end of the video because I didn't want it to come across as preachy or anything like that. But I do think it's an important example because everyone assumes that the way Games Workshop does things is the only way to do things. But Warlord Games are an example of a company which is successful, and they literally do the exact opposite to what Games Workshop does at pretty much every turn. So, Warlord Games offers fantastic starter deals. This is one of dozens of starter armies which they offer on their website. The Fallschirmjäger Winter Starter Army. Now, you may not like the winter models or winter themes. That's fine. There are many, many, many other ones. This is just one example. So for the price, the new price of a Games Workshop Combat Patrol, you get a full army. And when I say a full army, I mean a full army. There is no filler in this box. It is all killer, no filler. This is a bolt action is played at 1,250 points, but relatively that, you know, it's the same size as Warhammer 40k. You know, in Warhammer 40k, a Space Marine is going to come in at about sort of 15 to 20 points. In bolt action, the average cost of a bloke is 10 points. So 1,250 points is the equivalent of 2,000 points. Now, in bolt action and in the starter army, you get a tank, you get an armored car, basically you get 2 armored vehicles, you get 36 plastic infantry, and you get like an artillery piece, you get a couple of machine guns, you get another artillery with the mortar, and you get loads of special weapons. Like you get the Panzerschreck team, you get like a sniper, you get all the cool officers and like medics and stuff. You get a full army. In fact, this probably makes about 1,500 points. So you're getting more than a full army. You're getting enough to build an army and have a bit of flexibility as well. And there's no filler here. If you bought this army, every single model would be worth fielding. There would be nothing that you'd want to leave at home. And you would not need to buy a single additional model. And you wouldn't be hamstrung if you didn't. I know people who have bought this starter army, who have built it and painted it, and have taken it to local tournaments like RTTs and stuff, and come away with 2 wins. No issues whatsoever. We're not talking about, oh, here's a starter bundle, but yet half the models in it aren't really very useful. No, this is a starter army where genuinely you would not need to buy a single additional model if you didn't want to, and you wouldn't be completely left in the dirt with that approach. And there's one of these starter armies for every single nation. In fact, for less than one 2,000 point army from Games Workshop, which is susceptible to big meta changes, you could buy a starter army for every single major faction in the game. For the US, for the Brits, for the Germans, for the Soviets, and for the Japanese. And you wouldn't need to add a single model to those to feel like you had to keep up. You could add models to those armies if you wanted to, because you're like, hey, I fancy like a Tiger tank, or hey, I fancy like a Cromwell or something. But you wouldn't feel that pressure to do it, to like try and keep up. Moving on, Warlord Games also does sales. In fact, they recently did 3 sales. They did 10% off all Conflict 47. They did, I think it was 15% off all of the bolt action starter armies as well. So you could actually get that starter army that we were talking about for about £88 it was. And they also do, not only do they do good bundles, but they, as we saw with starter armies, where if you bought those things individually, they'd be a lot more expensive, but together it's a really good deal. But they also did a mystery box bundle recently where you got guaranteed £180 worth of models, but you only spent 100 quid. Now, obviously, everyone expected it to be full of filler, but those mystery boxes were actually incredible. They all came with a starter army, like we saw, and then the additional £80 worth of models were all good stuff. In fact, a lot of people have regretted buying those mystery boxes because they were just so damn good. It was a mystery box that was all killer, no filler. It was mental. So Warlord does good bundles. They do sales, but they also do pocket money models. They also do wanners. So you can buy 4 British airborne models, and you can buy airborne models, or you could buy army models, or you could buy German models or American models. It could be anything, but you can buy things like this for all the different nations, and it's 4 blokes for £9. Now, you could absolutely build these blokes from just the plastic airborne kit if you want to, but you get these, the reason you might buy these is because you get these unique sculpts. And, you know, this guy with the bugle, for example. But also, if you build all of your plastic airborne guys, and you're like, okay, I need to build these as like mainline squads, then rather than having to go and buy another box of plastic airborne, which is going to cost you £37 for 30 blokes, rather than buying another £37 box to then get your officers, instead you could be like, you know what? Even though on a per model basis it's more expensive, I only need, you know, a couple of officers and like, you know, and well, like 3 officers and like a medic to round the HQ section out, as it were. So I'll just spend £9. Yeah, on a per model basis, it's cost me more, but on an actual basis, it's cost me less. And if you want a really good example of this, so you could go into what you can't go into a Games Workshop and buy something with a £20 note. It's not possible. You can go into Warlord Games with a £20 note and buy something and come out with change. You go into Warlord Games with a £10 note and buy something and come out with change. But you know what's really mental? You can go into Warlord Games with a £5 note and come out with not only a model, come out with change. We have General Montgomery, who you could just use as an officer in your army. Yeah, he is a single piece model. You literally get him and you stick him on the base. But he's only £3.75. £3.75. I'm trying, if not to be salty, but just for a second, you could buy General Monty for £3.75, or you could buy Ursula Creed for £24. Now, it's a very unfair comparison because obviously Creed, bigger model, more complex, made out of plastic, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, the point still stands. You can go into Warlord Games and come out with a named character for less than £5. If you really want to, you can get you can get this fantastic model, which is a German dude, German cameraman dude. And you know what? You'll come out with enough money to maybe even buy yourself a Freddo bar. Now, that is a joke in the UK, but you get my point. It's a little wanna. It's a little pocket money thing. And the result of all this, of Warlord Games doing sales, doing bundles, doing wanners, in addition to them selling all the usual stuff. They'll sell you a big box of infantry. They'll sell you a big set of weapon teams. They do all that stuff, but then they also offer everything else that we've talked about. The result of this is that generally people are very, very positive to Warlord Games. You're always going to get some people which aren't happy, of course, and that's totally okay. But generally speaking, if you compare sort of the reputation of Warlord Games to the reputation of Games Workshop, it's night and day. And that's purely from a financial perspective as well. We're not even taking into account the different ways that these companies sort of approach their customers and approach legacy models and all that kind of stuff. There's a whole other conversation to be had there, but that is not for today. But you know what? I think this video has gone on long enough already, and I think it's about time to wrap it up. So, in summary, is Warhammer 40k too expensive? Well, as always, that is going to be down to the individual to decide, but a lot of people are starting to feel that way. And a lot of people are feeling priced out, and more so than ever, I am seeing people feel very negative towards Games Workshop and the price of Warhammer 40k. And I think this isn't just because prices always go up. I think that there's these other Jenga blocks which have been taken out, like a lack of sales, a lack of good bundles, a lack of wanners, and the fact that now people are just aware of other things being out there. There are alternatives to Warhammer 40k. There are alternatives to official Games Workshop models that you can absolutely use and have a great time with. And so not only is the GW price going up, but because there's these other factors, these other products available, it makes 40k feel more expensive than ever before. And people's heads, I think, are starting to turn. But of course, all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section below. Do you feel like Warhammer 40k is too expensive? And are you someone that feels like they've been priced out? Or is it just not a problem for you, just not a factor, and you think that business as usual and Games Workshop won't really feel any negative consequences of this and people will just keep buying 40k. I'm genuinely interested in hearing both sides. I presented obviously a lot of sort of facts and a lot of information to you guys today, but I do want to know what you guys think. Have we reached a line, or do you think we're totally fine? If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to go ahead and smash that like button and also subscribe to never miss an episode. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian glory hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and patrons. You guys are amazing. Truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordian Glory full-time without the incredible and generous support of my members. So thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a heartfelt thank you to Redfield, 32, Jurgens, Miasma, Try Again, Bragg, RJ, Scorpion, Bonbon Vert, Lord Pryor, Nicholas Walsh, John Stubbs, Guardian, Varney, Sword, Fish Trombone, Picklock the Forged. Seriously guys, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support is incredible and it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much. That's all for now. Hope you've all enjoyed today's video, and of course, as always, see you guys next time.